sign or two and maybe pay an annual operating fee, so that people who live downstream, who live near these sites, can find out who to call in the event of an incident, so that regulators have the resources to conduct oversight, and local officials know where these facilities are. Let me put this in budgetary terms. Clean water is an asset. Pollution is a liability. Even perception of pollution is a liability. I live in the Eastern Panhandle, on the opposite side of the Continental Divide, and yet people were calling hospitality providers in Berkeley Springs asking, is the water safe to drink? Am I going to have to cancel my trip because of the crisis in Charleston? Clean water is an asset. It provides life, supports agriculture, and pumps millions into our economy through tourism. But if this body is so eager to do the bidding of corporate campaign contributors that it will gamble with our air, water, and soil, then we will lose another asset, our people. If our elected officials have such a short memory that they would gut the AST Act, again, what reason do millennials have to stay? Why should expats come back? Why should we start a family or start a business in a state that does not seem to learn from its past? I urge rejection of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manthos. Scott Fleshwater, followed by John Street.
Good morning. My name is Scott Freshwater. I'm a lifelong resident of Spencer, West Virginia. I'm president of a 47-year-old company that employs nearly 100 hardworking West Virginians. Sadly, most of my employees travel each weekend to projects outside our state borders. And I also serve as the president of the Independent Oil and Gas Association of West Virginia, which represents hundreds of other family-owned producers just like me. Like those who may oppose this bill, I also enjoy greatly swimming, drinking, and bathing West Virginia's blessed and abundant waters. Fayetteville, West Virginia is one of my favorite summer destinations for me and my family. If your goal is to drive generational small family businesses and its many employees out of business and onto an ever-dwindling unemployment fund, you should oppose House Bill 2811. If your goal is to make West Virginia's regulations the toughest and most cumbersome in the nation on the oil and gas industry, you should oppose House Bill 2811. By way of comparison, Pennsylvania specifically exempts the tanks that are being discussed and contemplated in this bill. Ohio, another state, they also refer to EPA requirements, SPCC requirements, which we've been under since the 1980s, and trying to do our best to comply with those regulations. If your goal is to ignore the 150 plus years of operating history of our industry in West Virginia that has not impacted municipal water supplies, you should also oppose House Bill 2811. However, if you want to take just one small step towards helping an industry that has supported this state, its churches, its nonprofits, and so many other groups for all these decades, and frankly, is instrumental to its future, I strongly urge you to consider voting for and in support of House Bill 2811. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Freshwater. John Street, followed by Doug Malcolm.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks, everybody, for being here this morning on a very early Monday. I'm John Street. I speak on behalf of the West Virginia Environmental Council, and I oppose and ask you to oppose HB 2811. HB 2811 undercuts the original protections of the Above Ground Storage Tank Act. It would exempt over 2/3 of the tanks that were over a long set of legislative hearings and debate covered under that original act. That's 29,000 tanks that would be off the grid, off the map, and essentially invisible for the public to know about. HB 2811 seeks to solve a problem that doesn't exist. I take exception to the idea that our industry is overregulated. It's a small burden on industry to register tanks, put a sign on the tank, and pay a small one-time fee in order to meet the Above Ground Storage Tank Act requirements. I'd like to spend the last tiny bit of time reading a letter from April Keating, or part of a letter from April Keating of Mountain Lakes Preservation Association. She writes, "This bill is based on a faulty assumption and bad law. The only reason to exempt such tanks is that they contain materials from industry. This is a giveaway to industry at the expense of human health, at the expense of our economy and future development, at the expense of our tourism and agriculture businesses, at the expense of future organic farms and our extraordinary biodiversity. It's at the expense of clean, safe water, not only for us, but for our children and for the states downstream who receive our water. I ask you to please oppose House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Street. Doug Malcolm, followed by Laura Davidson.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Doug Malcolm. I'm Vice President of DC Malcolm Inc. We're a small conventional oil and gas producer based here in Charleston. You've already heard a few horror stories. I'm probably going to hear a few more today before this hearing's over. But I'd like to say one thing that I hope you all can keep in mind. The tanks we're discussing in House Bill 2811 are not a threat to the public water supplies in our state. First of all, they are not chemical storage tanks. It's as simple as that. They contain, in most cases, contain produced brine, salt water. Some of them contain crude oil, some of them contain a combination of the two. The produced brine is the exact same fluid that the Department of Highways uses to pre-treat roads in certain areas of the state, as testified to by a Department of Highways employee the other day in the House Energy Committee. These are not dangerous chemicals. Secondly, these tanks are not located anywhere near the public water intakes. Most of them are at least 10 to 12 miles away, and the large majority of them are more than 25 miles away from a public water intake. So they're nowhere near these water sources. Third, the tanks are small. They're less than 10,000 gallons. Usually, a lot of them are a lot smaller than that, and usually they're less than half full. These are not the same tanks that you see pictured when people are comparing them to the Freedom Industries tanks that contained over 4 million gallons. Finally, they're not exempt from regulation if this bill were to pass. Current oil and gas law addresses inspections, secondary containment, and fit-for-use requirements. In addition, the state requires Tier 2 registration, and the EPA requires spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans. Because of all this, I urge that you please vote in support of House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malcolm. Laura Davidson, followed by Doug Douglas.
Good morning. My name is Laura Davidson, and I'm reading a letter submitted by Timothy Ball, General Manager, Morgantown Utility Board. Members of the House Judiciary, Morgantown Utility Board opposes HB 2811. SB 373 considered and required the registration and regulation of the tanks now addressed by 2811. A year later, SB 423 considered again the scopes of tanks to be registered and regulated. Most of the tanks that are the subject of HB 2811 remain subject to registration requirements only, and very few are subject to regulation. These earlier decisions by the legislator are not mistakes. However, it would be a mistake to now exempt from registration the large number of tanks addressed by HB 2811, and to exempt from regulation the small number of tanks addressed by HB 2811 that are in the zones of peripheral concern. My utility and the other water suppliers around our state rely on inventories of registered tanks, whether or not they are subject to regulation, in order to protect our source water. We have accepted the new requirements imposed upon us by SB 373. We do so because we recognize the importance of protecting our priceless water sources. We rely upon the registrations in question to help us assess and prepare for the many threats to water quality throughout our watersheds. HB 2811 will undermine the progress achieved in SB 373, and worse, will erode protection of our state's water. As the largest publicly owned water system in our state, we respectfully request that you vote down HB 2811. Thank you for your service and your consideration of these comments. Respectfully, Timothy L. Ball, General Manager, Morgantown Utility Board.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Doug Douglas, followed by Julie Archer.
Good morning. My name is Doug Douglas. I work for a family-owned oil and gas company in Roane County. Companies like ours have been facing the most difficult economic times of a generation, if not ever. Most wells are operating at a loss in today's market, which hurts this economy and this budget crisis. At the same time as being hit with such negative well economics, we were also hit with a new, costly, and frankly unnecessary regulatory requirement with the AST law. The Freedom Industries spill was a chemical company with a chemical tank with a chemical leak. The bill should have been a chemical storage tank law. It was not. Chemicals defined as a compound or substance has been purified or prepared, especially artificially. The tanks we're talking about here don't contain chemicals, but naturally occurring materials, not man-made, brine and crude oil or a mixture of the two. First, the tanks we're talking about here do not pose the same risk as what Freedom Industries did. The size of that tank was multiple thousands of gallons compared to typical oil tanks of 4,200 gallons. Second, if a chemical leaks into a stream or river, as we all know with the situation, it's likely immersed in the water and can cause problems. Oil floats on top and gets skimmed off and contained much more easily than chemical leaks. Lastly, the tanks we're talking about here have been regulated since 1973 by the EPA with the SPCC plan. That program focuses on adequate containment in case of breaches rather than tank integrity. The purpose is to prevent such spills from ever actually reaching the water. Look at the track record of our industry for over 100 years. Can anyone name a catastrophic incident that's affected a water source from an oil and gas tank? Delegates are fighting an uphill battle to deal with this budget crisis, and this bill accomplishes both things. Takes away funding from, or takes away resources from DEP to focus on something that's not a problem, and also helps preserve an industry in our state that needs to be maintained. Why punish an industry that has existing standards that's proven effective for a century? We all want to protect our water. I'm a proud West Virginian whose family has lived here for generations. My son and I drink the water too. I urge your support of House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Julie Archer, followed by John Hildreth.
Good morning. My name is Julie Archer, and I'm here today on behalf of the West Virginia Surface Owners' Rights Organization. Our organization opposes House Bill 2811 and urges the legislature to keep in place the registration and regulatory requirements for the tanks the bill proposes to exempt from the Above Ground Storage Tank Act. The AST Act does not impose an unreasonable regulatory burden on tank owners, and we should not simply take the industry's word for it that these tanks that they want exempted contain substances that are not dangerous and pose no threat to our drinking water. One of the reasons given for the above ground storage tank is that it imposes a crippling regulatory burden, particularly on small oil and gas producers. However, as others have noted, House Bill 2811 would exempt 29,000 tanks owned and operated by the oil and gas industry, which is more than 2/3 of the tanks currently covered under the Act. But it's important to recognize that a majority of these tanks, 26,700 according to the DEP, are not considered regulated tanks under the Act. Rather, these tanks are merely required to be registered with the state and display a marker listing their registration number along with emergency contact information. Owners and operators of these tanks must also pay a one-time registration fee that ranges from $20 to $40 depending on when the tank went into service. This hardly seems to be a crippling regulatory burden. The industry also says that these tanks are in remote areas and few of them are near water supplies. But however, 2,300 of the tanks that would be exempt are in what is called the zone of peripheral concern, which is 5 to 10 hours upstream from any drinking water intake. The industry says the majority of these tanks that once exempted contain brine, which it says is salt water, and that some contain crude oil or some combination of both.
Ms.
However,
Archer, please wrap up your remarks. You're running way over.
Before these 2,300 tanks are exempted, further analysis of the brine and produced water contents should be conducted to evaluate the concentration of potential contaminants and the impact on drinking water. If it is determined the impacts would be negligible, then the tanks could be exempted. Condensate tanks should not be exempted, and we urge the legislature to err on the side of a caution and oppose House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Archer. John Hildreth, followed by Gary Zuckett.
Good morning, and thank you, delegates. My name is John Hildreth. I'm an immediate past president of the Independent Oil and Gas Association of West Virginia. My company is Roy G. Hildreth & Son, a mom-and-pop, family-owned business since 1953 in Roane County. Prior to the Freedom Incident, our company employed 98 full-time employees, all working overtime. Presently, we're down to 32 with no overtime, raises, or bonuses. The significance of this is our company's first reduction in workforce in 60 years occurred after the Freedom Incident and the ensuing legislation. Our employees' lives and the community have been devastated by the piling on of far too many overreaching, duplicative regulations and the creation of multiple agencies to administer them. Oil and gas should be handled by the Division of Oil and Gas. After all, these people are the ones that know this industry best. My first job in the oil and gas industry was 53 years ago as a well tender and a roustabout. My full-time career began 43 years ago. I've been on call 376,680 hours. My father and dedicated co-workers, many, many more hours. This is serious business for us all. I ask you to please fix this and vote yes on House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hildreth. Gary Zuckett, followed by Jim Pritt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Gary Zuckett. I'm Executive Director of West Virginia Citizen Action Group, and I'm here to oppose House Bill 2811 for the following reasons. We've already heard that it would exempt almost a majority of the tanks that are now under regulation with this the current law. And what we have here is if we don't register these tanks, how will we know if they're in a zone of critical concern that would potentially affect a public water system or a zone of peripheral concern? These are different zones upstream of public water intakes. If these tanks are totally exempted from those requirements, then there will be no way to track these things. I think it's reasonable to at least have these things be registered and labeled as to their owners and that type of thing. Also, we've also been told by the industry that most of these tanks just contain brine. Brine, it sounds like something you make pickles with. I would suggest that this is not a substance that you want in your drinking water. There have been spills of this brine, and it's led to fish kills in the river up in Doddridge County. And I see my red light is on, so I will wrap things up here. Again, HB 2811 is really a bill that the industry keeps telling us that we need to pass this for jobs, but I think that's a false choice. We need both clean water and jobs, so let's have both. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckett. Jim Pritt, followed by Philip Price.
Morning, delegates. My name is Jim Pritt. I'm with Intervest Operating, LLC. We operate about 2,000 wells here in West Virginia, about 52,000 wells across the United States. I serve as regulatory manager for the company, and I attend many regulatory meetings and monitor what's going on all over the nation at the federal and state level. I can say without a doubt that this particular piece of legislation, especially affecting the zone of peripheral concern, is the most outlandish overreaching piece of legislation that I've ever seen since I've been working in the business in 1987. Speaking to cost, Intervest Operating for the last 2.5 years, has spent over $500,000 to comply with this regulation. $117,000, and I have the details here, what it took to get everything registered. Ongoing basis, about $250,000 a year, so it's about $1,000 per tank. On many of the tanks that we have that generate maybe $4 or $5 per day. I'm from West Virginia. I was born and raised in Randolph County. I love this state, and I don't wake up every day thinking about how do I destroy the environment. What is more important to the people of our state? The quality of life, which is real now or in the future, or a well-intended but misguided implication of a future accident, oil or brine tank spill affecting drinking water supplies that may occur in light of 150 years of historical evidence that it has not. The tank's effect in our state and our industry, what's happened here, has contributed to downsizing, layoffs of hundreds of employees, and bankruptcies of oil and gas companies. It's increased unemployment in many rural areas of the state. It's increased truck traffic to and from oil and brine tanks that have been downsized. It's decreased severance tax as a result of wells being shut in due to not being able to get to the tanks as quickly. It's increased the cost to producers for transportation of oil and brine. It's prevented house gas users, farm taps, from receiving their contractual right to free gas as we've had to shut the wells in. There's more at stake here than meets the eye. It's not a question of just duplicative over-regulation for the sake of saying we did something, but rather it's a question about the future quality of life for our state's residents by continued natural gas supply and employment for members of our industry and financial security. This legislation has affected many of the shallow wells. The shallow wells in West Virginia supply about 80% of the gas to the residents and businesses of our state.
Mr. Pritt, please wrap up your remarks.
So at a time when our industry, that particular sector of our business, is on its back and been barely able to survive, we've got to incur these additional costs. All we're doing is shortening the lifespan of the wells, which will ultimately affect the residents of our state. So please consider voting for HB 2811. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pritt. Philip Price, followed by Chris Veazey.
I'm Dr. Phil Price. I'd like to clarify something about the content of these tanks. We're being told that they contain brine. Well, one of the most important characteristics of brine is it's highly corrosive and will corrode pipes, tanks, valves. Another very important distinction about this brine, it's 100% natural, it comes from the ground. A lot of it is highly radioactive. And you don't have to take my word for it. The state of Pennsylvania's DEP a year ago completed a very broad survey of fracking liquids derived from Marcellus Shale. And they found very high levels of radioactivity in dozens and dozens of samples from around the Marcellus Shale liquids. These radioactivity possibilities and problems are serious enough that in the state of Pennsylvania's report, they actually discuss truck drivers that drive the tanks full of liquid needing steel radiation shielding so that they can stay under their annual limit for radiation dose. I think this is a very serious issue. Some of these tanks contain as much as 20,000 times the safe level of radiation for water contact. So my comment would be potentially enjoy West Virginia woods and waters and maybe take home some radiation to the family.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Chris Veazey, followed by Donna Belcher, or Beaker, I guess it is, Beaker.
Thank you. My name is Chris Veazey. I'm the Safety and Environmental Manager for Intervest Operating West Virginia. I work with Jim Pritt. I handle the ongoing compliance for safety and environmental. Intervest has spent $43,000 in documented inspections and $37,000 on annual certifications required by the AST law. These costs include training our internal inspector to reduce costs for certifying tanks that are otherwise routinely inspected by experienced well operators. These costs are redundant of compliance costs from the U.S. EPA on spill prevention and right to know, Tier 2 reporting, and West Virginia Office of Oil and Gas documented inspections. These aren't the costs of doing business, but redundant costs due to an overreaching one-size-fits-all regulation. The above-ground storage tank add an additional level regulation on oil and brine tanks that have been regulated by the West Virginia Office of Oil and Gas and the U.S. EPA spill prevention rules for decades. Majority of Intervest tanks have hold CBM produced water. Some of it is land applied. It's the same water that's used by the city of Beckley as their primary water supply. But with the law, the AST law, they're considered hazardous. Intervest has gone through 2 across-the-board layoffs while spending $23,000 in tank fees and $114,000 in protection requirements that are not required by the EPA and Oil and Gas, Office of Oil and Gas, because Intervest operates small, non-chemical tanks. Because of closure guidelines within the rule for tanks in the zone of critical concern and peripheral concern, Intervest would have spent $115,000 to avoid regulations or reduce the size of tanks on wells that are idle due to historically low gas and oil prices. We have produced oil in this state for over 160 years, and my family has lived in Canal Valley for even longer than that. My family is impacted the same way as every family by the oil and gas industry, which is overwhelmingly positive while providing a high standard of living and sustaining modern life. I support House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veazey. Donna Beaker, followed by Bob Matthey, Jr.
Thank you. My name is Donna Becker, and I'm a Charleston resident and chairperson of the Catholic Committee of Appalachia, and I'm here to urge you to vote against House Bill 2811. I'd like to make 2 points. First, I'm sure those speaking in favor of this bill will argue that it will add to the inducement for businesses to locate here. But I ask you, why would any owner or employee of any business choose to move here with their families with the risk of a repeat of the weeks-long 2014 water crisis becoming more of a possibility? Secondly, instead of taking 2 steps backward, why not step out of the box and move forward? Move to stop giving away our most precious resource. In his recent encyclical, Laudato Si, on care for our common home, Pope Francis devotes several paragraphs to the issue of water, stating that access to safe, drinkable water is a basic and universal human right, since it is essential to human survival and, as such, is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. And from the Catholic Committee of Appalachia's statement on water protection by Wheeling Jesuit theologian Dr. Jessica Robleski, in Appalachia, we are blessed with an abundant annual rainfall, but this does not mean that we can afford to be complacent about protecting our water, as was recently demonstrated by the chemical spill in the Elk River, which left hundreds of thousands of people in Charleston and the surrounding area without water for several weeks in January of 2014. On both a large and small scale, assaults upon the waters of Appalachia have been persistent throughout the history of the region, where the profitability of industry is often placed ahead of the health of communities and ecosystems. We urge our lawmakers to adopt a precautionary principle with regard to our water resources, such as that which Pope Francis recommends in Laudato Si, namely that if objective information suggests that serious and irreversible damage may result, a project should be halted or modified, even in the absence of indisputable proof. Such a principle would effectively reverse the burden of proof from a situation in which individuals and communities must conclusively prove that harm has been done, often only after irreversible damage has occurred.
Ms. Becker, please wrap up your remarks.
Okay, thank you. To one that would require industries to show that their operations are safe to the health of our water and the lives that depend on it before proceeding with a given project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. Bob Matthey, Jr., followed by Carrie Jo Grace.
Good morning. I'm Bob Matthey from Lipizan Petroleum, located in Ritchie County. We employ 5 people currently. We're a small producer The AST bill has been the most devastating thing that's ever hit me in this industry in 40 years. We spent $65,000 trying to comply with the rule, and we spent all of our cash reserves. We currently have a very good system in our office now to keep operating with the 5 people that we have. At the end of the month, my secretary tells me how much the bills are, how much money we need for payroll, so I write a check from my retirement fund to keep my people working. We need some relief. Being under the AST law is like dying of slow death. The problems were created with the spill in the valley, and the rule that was passed is a knee-jerk reaction to a problem that we didn't create. We've been producing crude oil and natural gas for over 100 years and not had any of these problems. A lot of you wear lipstick, used toothpaste this morning, had tires on your car. It all comes from oil. Oil is not hazardous. It doesn't cause a problem. And the rules are too far-reaching. None of the other states around us have any rules like this, and we need some help because I can't continue spending my retirement money to keep my company afloat and keep West Virginians employed. So I urge you to vote in favor of House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthey. Carrie Jo Grace, followed by Greg Kozer.
My name's Carrie Jo Grace. I work for the Our Children, Our Future campaign, which is working to make West Virginia the best place in the world to live, work, and raise a family, which means that we need both economic opportunity and a healthy environment for our children. But I want to tell you a little bit about my story. My fiance and I, first of all, we both live in Charleston, and we lived through the water crisis, and my son is still traumatized by it. He still will not drink tap water. But we also own some rural acreage where there is an oil and gas easement across our rural acreage. Right across the creek from us, there is a well and a storage tank. Up at the top of the mountain, about 50 yards across from our property line, is another well and storage tank. Nowhere near a public water intake, but it sits right above the spring that supplies the water for our home. I argue with you that this is a burdensome regulation. I have to get building permits to build my home so that my home doesn't fall down on my head. That's a regulation to protect me from myself. We need a regulation to protect our drinking water from our spring from accidents happening so that we know what's in that tank that's right above our spring. And the gentleman before me said that oil's not hazardous. Please drink a glass of water with some oil on top of it. I ask the legislature to oppose House Bill 2811.
Thank you, Ms. Grace. Greg Kozer, followed by John Doyle.
I'm Greg Kazera. I'm the president of Learn Leadership, LLC. I'm a registered professional engineer here in the state. I have a master's in environmental engineering from Marshall University. I live in Pinch. Our family was directly impacted by that Freedom spill. But in the 80s and 90s, I managed a facility in Elkview that had tanked chemical storage. Every 6 months, I saw an inspector from the DNR. We never had a problem. We're surrounded by oil and gas wells. They all have tanks. I'm not worried about those wells, folks. And I know the contents aren't radioactive. They checked that in the 1990s. What I am concerned about is tank storage next to a river that's hazardous. We need to focus on what's important. All this law, the current AST law is actually putting my family at risk by taking the focus off of what's really important. And that's where we need to put it. We're trying to bring industry back into this state. We don't need more regulations and bad regulations. We need to protect our resources. The Freedom spill wasn't caused by a lack of law. It was caused by a lack of enforcement. I support House Bill 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John Doyle, followed by Jesse Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Doyle. I represent West Virginia Free, an organization advocating for women and children. Women and nursing mothers, pregnant women, and newborn babies are particularly susceptible to pollutants in drinking water, more so than the general population. And make no mistake, there will be some more pollution put in the water if House Bill 2811 passes. Now, I am told that that doesn't make any difference because the drinking water standards stay the same. Well, if that is true, then what will result is some of our water systems will have to upgrade their equipment to handle the additional pollution that is put in the water. And if that occurs, who will pay for the upgrades? The ratepayers will pay for the upgrades. Who are the ratepayers? You, me, and everybody else in West Virginia that gets public water, whether it's from a privately owned system or a publicly owned system. Now, I believe that any additional fee or rate for a utility regulated by the government that is authorized by the government is a tax increase. Now, Mr. Chairman, I suspect that you and some of the other members here who know me are expressing a little bit of curiosity that this unreconstructed liberal John Doyle would be opposed to a tax increase. I do not automatically recoil at the idea as long as that tax increase is necessary. This tax increase is not necessary because there's another way to fix the problem, which is to not put pollutants in the water, and you do that by rejecting 2811. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Jesse Wilson, followed by Bill Price.
Hello, my name is Jesse Rogers Wilson. I'm here to support HB 2811. I am here on behalf of my family's oil and gas company, Rogers & Son Oil and Gas. We are a third-generation, small independent oil and gas company that's been in operation since 1961. Over the last 3 years, during very poor market conditions for oil and gas, small independent oil and gas producers like my family's company have spent countless payroll hours registering oil tanks, absorbing the cost to comply with additional environmental regulations imposed by the AST law, not to mention the many man-hours it has taken to do all this for oil and brine tanks that will not harm public water system in any way. For 30 years, oil and brine tanks have been regulated by the West Virginia Office of Oil and Gas with secondary containment systems, to name just one of the regulations providing protection of our water. The Freedom Industries chemical spill that proposed the introduction of the AST law did not even have proper regulations, yet the oil and gas industry is being penalized. The coal industry became so heavily regulated that thousands of jobs were lost. If 2811 is not passed, the same thing will happen to the oil and gas industry, not only costing thousands more jobs, but also another decline to West Virginia's economy. I come here today to ask that you please pass 2811 and let the EPA, the West Virginia Office of Oil and Gas, and the West Virginia Division of Waste and Water Management continue to enforce the regulations already in place without this additional regulation to cause more financial hardship and ruination of the oil and gas industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Bill Price, followed by Ann Blankenship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this public hearing. My name is Bill Price. I'm a staff person for the Sierra Club here in West Virginia. I'm also a resident of Charleston, West Virginia, and I was directly impacted by the chemical spill 3 years ago. But before that, I spent 30-some years living in a rural area of this state that did not have a public water system. The water system I had was my water well. And what I did not know about the threats to that water scared me, made me fearful, made me wonder whether or not the people in the leadership of the state of West Virginia cared enough about me to protect that water as much as they did in any municipal water system. And so when 3 years ago the chemical spill occurred and I saw the legislature take control and say, no more, we will make sure this does not happen again, I was hopeful. 2 years ago, when that bill was gutted, I became angry. Today, I am just determined. Every resident of the state of West Virginia, everyone who lives here, deserves to turn on that tap and know what the threats are around that water system, whether it's coming from a municipal system or their own private well. And I cannot fathom how we can stand in this chamber and talk about how crude oil is not dangerous. Go talk to the people in the Gulf Coast. And my water and everyone else's water is important too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Ann Blankenship, followed by Joe Solomon.
Good morning. My name is Ann Blankenship, and I'm the Executive Director of the West Virginia Oil and Natural Gas Association. Wavonga represents companies with billions of dollars invested in oil and gas production, transportation, and processing in West Virginia. Many of our members operating conventional wells are affected by the AST Act. The 200 members of Wavonga understand and appreciate the need for good regulations. A responsible and predictable regulatory framework is an important part of our business. We support regulations where the path to compliance is clear, where the cost is justified, and where the benefit of environmental protection is achieved. But that's not the case in a part of the Above Ground Storage Tank Act in its current form. The impact of it on some sectors of the oil and gas industry is not balanced with potential harm to the environment. The tanks which Senate Bill 2811 seeks to exclude are relatively small tanks which store oil or salt brine in very remote locations, far from public water intakes. These tanks are already being regulated under other environmental programs by EPA. As you have heard here today already, for some producers that are affected, the cost of compliance with this act cuts close to the bottom line. This is especially difficult during the current tough price environment in the oil and gas sector. The impact of the high cost of compliance with this additional layer of regulation on these producers far outweighs any benefit to the environment, which is minimal to non-existent, as these tanks are not a threat to public water supplies. Appropriate regulation is important and valued, but the part of the AST Act which places unnecessary burdens on the tanks smaller than 210 barrels and outside of the zone of critical concern, that part of the AST Act should be changed. So we support the passage of HB 2811 in the name of balanced regulations which protect the environment without needlessly damaging businesses in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blankenship. Joe Solomon, followed by Bob Radeball.
I just want you all to hear this message loud and clear, that young people are leaving in large part because of the dice y'all are throwing on clean water. Young people don't want to give their best teaching years if they can't trust their tap. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Young entrepreneurs don't want to throw down roots if they can't trust their water. Young innovators and young people with fresh drive and new ideas have a lot of choices. In a state that hasn't learned its lessons from one of our country's largest cases of contaminated water, well, if we're not acting as if we care, why should they? Sure, the Independent Oil and Gas Association of West Virginia will tell you that this bill is not about drinking water, but from any common sense point of view, that's poppycock. Everything flows downstream. That's what water does. This bill will let 29,000 oil and gas tanks spread across the state in a state that is laced with countless creeks and streams and wells, water wells, operate far more in the shadows, all those wells, in the dark, equipping 29,000 oil and gas tanks with what the Charleston Gazette's award-winning journalist Ken Ward Jr. describes as wholesale exemptions. If every tank was a foot, that would get you up Mount Everest. For what it's worth, up on Everest, up at 29,000 feet, this elevation is called the death zone. Is that what we want to call our state? The Independent Oil and Gas Association of West Virginia will tell you they can't afford the current regulations. Meanwhile, somehow, the Independent Oil and Gas Association of West Virginia pulled in over $2.5 million in 2014, the last year public records are available. For a not-for-profit, I'm pretty sure they're rolling in it. It will be a nice day when our elected representatives listen to the people, especially the next generation, instead of money dipped in oil. Honestly, I doubt that day is today.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Bob Radeball, followed by Jeff Allen.
I'd like to thank the committee for allowing this public hearing this morning and the opportunity to speak. I'm Bob Radeball from Gilmer County, West Virginia. I was born there, raised there, educated there, worked there, just trying to make a living. I have a small oil and gas company, S&R Gas Ventures. We've been in business 25, 26 years, and before that I worked for another private company, and prior to that I was in state government, actually with the Department of Natural Resources. At this point in time, we currently have SPCC regulations, spill prevention, control, and countermeasures. Back in the early 70s, the EPA started this regulation, and at that time it basically covered crude oil tanks and their containment. Later in life, it also took in brine water. But prior to them taking in brine water, back in the late 80s, the state of West Virginia, Office of Oil and Gas decided that we needed a state-based regulation that did take in brine water as well as crude oil. And they also went as far as saying that anything that could be classified as a pollutant, if it entered the state waters, was to fall under state-level SPCC regulations. Then along about 3 years ago, we had a very misfortunate situation here in the Elk River, in the Kanawha Valley. The oil and gas industry became a victim of that, as well as a lot of other people. Now all of a sudden the AST Act was developed, and so what that equals to, I got one tank and 3 regulations that's governing that tank. Plus, we have an annual oil and gas inspection from the Office of Oil and Gas, and we also have Homeland Security if you have crude oil to report your inventories and so on. So that's overregulation. Overregulation costs additional expenses. And we're not talking about the situation of registering tanks and having to pay that fee and putting a label on the side of it. That's not what this legislation is about. We're still going to have to do that, and we will do that. But we need some relief on these regulations and these expenses at this time. Again, I'm just a country boy trying to make a living. I'm a proud West Virginian, and that there's times here in the past 3 years I think, why in the heck did I even stay in West Virginia? Why didn't I go with my friends, load up in the van and cross the state line and never look back? But I've stayed here, but now I'm starting to second guess myself why. So please give us some relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Radeball. Jeff Allen, followed by Jim Stevens.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Allen, and I am the Executive Director of the West Virginia Council of Churches. The West Virginia Council of Churches has been trying to move our public policy debate away from ideology and away from the language of economy toward the language of the common good. Dr. Robert Rupp has noted that the secular parallel to the common good is the general welfare. In a recent article, and I apologize for not having the reference to that, someone noted that the struggle in America, and probably one could say West Virginia today, is between the general welfare and the specific welfare. House Bill 2811 focuses on a specific welfare, but the standard that we should be looking at and the role of government is to promote the general welfare for the people of West Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Jim Stevens, followed by Paul Dalsell.
Good morning. I didn't prepare a speech. I own Hard Rock Exploration. It's privately owned here in the state. We have 375 wells, Mason, Putnam, Cabell, Jackson, Roane, and Worth counties. I do not get in politics, but I thought that I should come and talk about this today. This bill is important to the small producer in the state, HB 2811. There is no issues with these tanks on the side of the hill. There is very little fluids. Our tanks are 40 barrels, 1,200 gallons. Most of them are less than half full. We have worked ourselves to death as a small company in the state trying to keep up with the regulation. We have the federal EPA with Quad O that just got killed. We have the tank registration. You know, when you register a tank, it never goes away. You have to keep records of that tank until it's destroyed, which it doesn't make any sense to me. We're a viable, truthful company in the state of West Virginia, And so we just need a little bit of relief. We need common sense. My question to this whole group, do you know what the biggest problem in West Virginia is for people's water wells? Is their own septic tanks. If you go out and look, a lot of problems is their own septic tanks and their water well not being cased properly. So let's talk about common sense. Let's unregulate a tank that is not a public threat, and let's do what's right. That's all we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Paul Dalzell, followed by Phil Reel.
Thank you. My name is Paul Dalzell. I want to thank you for letting us have this public comment hearing. I do appreciate that. I just can't believe that we're here again, doing this again. It's been every year. 2014, 3 years ago, you passed unanimously a bill, HB 373, that would have prevented that chemical spill from ever happening again. And I thank you all for that. That was when I became involved in water justice. That's when you created me. Then in 2015, the oil and gas industry got you to roll it back some more and try to gut it, and tried again in 16, and here we are again. This legislation would exclude 29,000 tanks owned and operated by the oil and gas industry from West Virginia storage tank law, from the ASTA. 69% of the tanks, 69% of the tanks that were registered. I also grew up here in West Virginia. I grew up in Clay County. Of course, that was back when it was doing well, and the oil and gas industry did help that economy, and that's just fine. I also went to school in Glenville in Gilmer County, another big producer of the oil and gas industry. But we keep reading and hearing that this is a burden both on the DEP and the tank owners, but it's not really. It's a burden on the DEP. If it isn't a burden on the DEP, they register the tanks, pay a ridiculously small fee, and have to have an emergency contact number, a couple of signs on them. It doesn't do that. We also keep hearing that the tanks include brine, and the brine's just salt water, but it's not just salt water. We know that. It contains a lot of chemicals. We know that crude oil is bad for the environment, and we know that the produced water or backflow water is also very bad for the environment. Ammonium, barium, BTEX, which is a group of volatile organic compounds frequently found in the brine.
Mr. Dalzell, please wrap
Yes,
up
sir.
your comments.
There are dangerous chemicals in the brine. There are dangerous chemicals in the flowback. Crude oil needs to be registered. This is not a burden. I strongly urge rejection of 2811.
Thank you, Mr. Dalzell. Phil Reel, followed by Angie Rosser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be as brief as I can be, and that's hard for me to do sometimes. But thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. First of all, I would like to say that this is not about eliminating regulation of oil and gas tanks. There is plenty of regulation of oil and gas tanks, as you've heard from a number of the speakers. Ohio essentially uses the same body of law, rule, and regulation to govern above-ground storage tanks utilized by the oil and gas industry, as did West Virginia until 3 years ago. And be mindful that we didn't have an issue of any sort relating to public water intakes, which is what the current Above Ground Storage Tank Act is intended to do. Pennsylvania has an Above Ground Storage Tank Act, and the very tanks that we're talking about today are exempted, all of them. We're not asking for all of them to be exempted here. We're saying leave the ones in the zone of critical concern, which, by the way, was calculated under a suspicious kind of set of circumstances, utilizing 90% of stream flows year-round when we know some of the streams are dry, not utilizing topography. We have some situations in the state where
oil or brine water that would escape from a tank would have to flow uphill to get to the stream. These are the sorts of things that create havoc for members of the Independent Oil and Gas Association who I represent here today. The real problem, and I've got the end here, the real problem with this is that this has been a solution for a problem that didn't occur in the oil and gas industry. We have, you've heard, tremendous administrative costs, tremendous infield costs, burdens on the regulatory agency to try to keep up with the tanks that we operate. And by the way, there is a name of the owner of a well posted at each well, even if the Above Ground Storage Tank Act goes away. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Reel. Our last presenter is Angie Rosser. Ms. Rosser, you have the last word.
Angie Rosser, West Virginia Rivers Coalition. Two things I'd like the committee to consider closely is one about registration. These 29,000 tanks are already registered. What are we going to do? Just take them off the list? When Freedom Industries happened, the legislature was amazed. What do you mean we don't have an inventory of tanks? What do you mean we don't know what's out there? What is the point of having an above-ground storage tank registry if we're going to remove 2/3 of those tanks? It becomes meaningless in knowing what the risks are or if there are no risks in a certain watershed or drinking water supply drainage area. Secondly, what has not been mentioned yet is a section of the Above Ground Storage Tank Act, 2235C and D. And I encourage every tank owner here to look closely at this provision. All of the things that have been brought up about other regulations under other parts of the statute or federal regs can be provided to the Secretary of DEP with a request to honor these plans and this point of compliance to be able to comply of the Above Ground Storage Tank Act. This was a provision that was negotiated with the oil and gas industry 2 years ago that they agreed to that provided this means to use existing regulations as a way to comply with this act. So please look closely at that section 2230-5C and D. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosser. That concludes the remarks of those who signed up. We thank each of you for your input. Please note that House Bill 2811 is the second item on the Judiciary Committee's agenda for today. And to the members of the Judiciary Committee, we will convene at 9:15. Thank you. The hearing is adjourned.
A public hearing on House Bill 2811 relating to the definition of above-ground storage tanks, that tanks having a capacity of 210 barrels or less that contain oil or brine water are not regulated under this article. Coming up next, a presentation by Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher before a joint meeting of the House and Senate Finance Committees. That's coming up here on the West Virginia Channel. It may take a little while to clear out the public hearing, folks, and bring in the members of the House and Senate Finance Committees and Secretary Thrasher. So in the meantime, we'll just wait here on the West Virginia Channel.
All right, let me get out so I can see it.
This is a live look inside the House of Delegates chamber at the state capitol in Charleston as we're waiting for a presentation by Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher. During his appearance before the Senate Finance Committee last month, Secretary Thrasher asked for a joint meeting to outline the administration's Save Our State initiative and plans for the West Virginia Department of Commerce. Secretary Thrasher gave a presentation in the House sometime last month. This will probably be the same kind of information we heard then, probably with a little more detail now that the governor has outlined Save Our State. Also, the governor will be in a town hall meeting tonight in Bluefield, taking audience questions about the SOS Save Our State program. You can see that here at 7 o'clock here on the West Virginia Channel, courtesy of WVVA-TV in Bluefield. That's tonight at 7 here on the West Virginia Channel. Governor Jim Justice in a town hall meeting in Bluefield. The Senate Select Committee on Tax Reform is also meeting at 9 o'clock this morning. It's our intention to record that meeting and bring it to you after the Secretary's presentation is over and before floor sessions begin at 11 o'clock.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a joint finance committee meeting, so if you would take your seat, I'd like to go ahead and get started. If you go ahead and take your seat, please.
See? You can't slip by things on me. You do what you want to do. Oh, yeah. No, that's fine. I never said, but you do whatever you want. Okay. Woody, you ready? You all ready? Well, good morning. I want to welcome everyone to our informational meeting this morning. We have with us Commerce Secretary Thrasher. He's going to talk about the Save Our State plan. So with that, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Delegate Householder. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate everybody that is here in attendance.
that this is another in a continuing series of sort of events that we're having in front of the House, and I hope some senators join us as well. See some of them coming down now. And the goal is to educate you all on what we go through to attract businesses to West Virginia. We've been here for a series of meetings where we've sort of taken the perspective that our resources have been overly limited. And I think what we try to do is gauge what our competitors do, which is what I think any good business does. It looks at what their competitors do and gives a sense of how are we matching up with those folks. In some ways, West Virginia ranks very strongly, and in some ways, it does not. There is no substitute for an impartial perspective on that situation. And so toward that end, we have invited two folks that the Development Office has worked with for a number of years to ask them to come in and make a presentation to you all. And these are site selection people. These are folks that are hired by industry to find them sites, and they look at a variety of issues, and they're going to go into some of those things today. But I think at the end of it, we're all going to walk out a little better educated on what West Virginia's Development Office and development efforts face in terms of a competition. I'm going to start off with Jim Clark. And Jim, I don't have a resume, but I do know a little bit about you. Jim has been a fixture in West Virginia for a long time in terms of attracting industry to West Virginia. In my previous employment, I had worked with Jim on a variety of different projects, but Jim's biggest claim to fame is that he was the site selection consultant for the Procter & Gamble facility, which is truly a state-of-the-art, internationally sort of renowned project that's taken place in Berkeley County as we speak. Jim's a graduate of Notre Dame High School. I know that because a former partner of mine, he always talked about how great Notre Dame was, and I want you to know I disagreed, as I should. But I do want to tell you these guys have a lot of important things to do, and for them to take time out of their day to come and join us, we should all appreciate that. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it over to you. Jim Clark with Jones Lang LaSalle.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As Woody said, I'm with Jones Lang LaSalle. I do site selection work. I've done a number of deals, advised a number of companies here in West Virginia as well as across the country. I am based in Tysons Corner, Virginia, and am happy to be here. I'd like to thank the chairman of both committees for allowing me to be here and the members for attending. I do have a little slideshow here. Basically, what I want to talk about is the economics of site location strategy and how corporate America looks at the various factors that influence their decision to either locate a business or expand an existing business. And there are thousands of data points that might be a little too small for you all to see. But there are thousands of data points that companies evaluate when they're looking at either a site location or a site expansion. It goes everything from weather to fear of earthquakes to population to available of skilled and unskilled labor, power, obviously transportation. But what this arrow is supposed to indicate is there are thousands of data points that are available to these companies in their evaluation, and they filter it down to help determine the best location for their particular business. This slide is just another example in a different graphic way of highlighting the various elements that these companies consider. Probably the easiest is to look at the top 12 of these items as done by Area Development Magazine, which is kind of the Bible of the site selection industry. And every year for 30 years, they have done a survey of both corporate executives and folks that are in the site selection business like myself, and they publish two surveys. One, the corporate survey, in the first quarter of the year, and then the other, the consultant survey, in the third quarter of the year. And what this does, this list highlights their top 11. And we have taken the liberty of highlighting the ones that we think government policy out of those 11 can influence the most. Number one is availability of skilled labor. We have not identified this as directly influenced by by government policy, but it can clearly be argued that the availability of skilled labor is in fact a result of government policy. The next would be highway accessibility, not only for raw materials and finished goods, but obviously for the easy commute of employees to get to the plant. Third, and one that has considerably grown over the last 10 years, is quality of life. When I first started in this business, quality of life might have been in the top 20, but it would have been somewhere between 20 and 10. With the advent of millennials and their impact on the workforce, quality of life has significantly jumped, so that this year, for the first time, it's inside the top 10, and it's the third. Economics come into play in terms of occupancy and construction cost. Another fast-growing concern is the availability of facilities and sites. These folks are all focused kind of on a just-in-time delivery platform. So they're looking for buildings that are vacant and available, or they're looking for sites that are pretty much ready to go and don't take a lot of time either to be permitted, approved, or infrastructure delivery. Again, the ones that are highlighted are ones that we think government policy can affect the most. Number 6 on the list is the cost of labor. Then corporate tax rate, proximity to major markets for the delivery of finished goods, state and local incentives. This is a topic that is growing in stature. When I first started in the business, state and local incentives were usually considered kind of like the sprinkles on icing on a cake. Then they became the icing on the cake, and now more and more they're becoming the cake. Companies are looking at what their competitors are doing and what states are doing in terms of recruiting these businesses, as well as what they're doing to retain and help these businesses expand. Finally, energy availability and energy cost is another concern that is growing in importance. And then tied with the availability of state and local incentives are tax exemptions. But if you look at this as the top 10 list, there are 7 of these that government policy can directly influence. When you look at the tax effect and the incentive effect on businesses, there are 3 or 4 major areas that states look at in terms of determining what might be available for a certain company. And it's basically done on a return of investment basis, taking into account the capital expenditure that the company is going to invest, the payroll, whether these are net new jobs. Most incentive programs are based on net new jobs as opposed to jobs that already exist, and basically calculating the tax revenue or the income that the new or expanded facility will bring to the state and to the local community, and basically crunching the numbers and looking to see what the economic benefit is for the community. And then there's a whole list of tax issues. And again, as we discussed earlier, tax implications are a top 10 consideration of these firms when they're looking to grow and expand. And these taxes are generated through payroll tax, sales tax, property tax, corporate income tax. And your competitors, your neighboring states, are all offering programs that either abate or credit these taxes in some form, based on the amount of employment and the capital spend. And you might go blind looking at this next chart, but it just shows you a method that the companies look to evaluate. If you've got 4 locations kind of going in a row across the top, and you look at the columns, they will have a weighted average, and they will grade each one of the locations based on a number of factors. Labor, and there's 6 sub-chapters under labor. Real estate, what available grants are there for energy? What is the business climate? Is it pro-business? Is it anti-business? What are the economic incentives? And what's the availability? What's the time payout on those? Are there environmental conditions, either in terms of a sensitivity by the state or the local jurisdiction, or are there environmental concerns associated with a specific property? And then another way to evaluate it is the next slide. And again, you'll probably go blind looking at this, but it shows that there's 5 different or 6 different metropolitan statistical areas that this company is looking at, and they take their topics across the top: demographics, cost factor, community attributes, quality of life, and they rank these items to come out with a weighted score. Not each one of these topics is evenly weighted. Some are more important than others, and each company's decision process will evaluate these decisions on a varied scale. When you look at the end of the line, people always think that rent is what drives real estate decisions. But if you look at this chart, you'll find out that real estate typically is only about 5% of the cost of operating the facility. What's really driving it is transportation, inventory, and labor account for over 2/3 of the cost of operating the facility. So your occupancy costs, I'm a real estate professional, and we think that real estate drives everything, but it really doesn't in terms of the factors that these folks are looking at. That's kind of the end of my prepared statement. I think that I know that the state is looking to increase, or the development office to increase their budget. Having worked with them on the Procter & Gamble project, I know that they put a sizable package, at least as it relates to the history of West Virginia, on the table for Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble made their decision based on a number of factors, and I think in their case, the incentives were the icing on the cake. I think there were some other factors at work that West Virginia rose to the top in what was a multi-state competition. But the professionalism of the development office, their ability to work with Procter & Gamble and attract what I think will be generational jobs to the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, and the welcoming not only of the state but the local community in Berkeley County is what made Procter & Gamble comfortable with it. Will be their first new plant in the United States in over 40 years. They're well under construction. I think they're very happy with the reception that they've received from the community in terms of labor. They actually had so many applications they kind of had to shut down the process for a while so that they could catch up. But I think that a deal like that West Virginia can attract moves the needle significantly for the state, and will allow the state hopefully to capitalize on that project by touting it, as well as the other projects in the state, as how West Virginia does business. So I'm here to help support the development office in terms of an increase in their budget so that they can keep up with their neighbors, continue to make West Virginia more competitive. I know that the legislature has passed some legislation recently about being a right-to-work state. That checks a box in terms of the factors that these companies look towards. I know the legislator has worked on modifying workmen's compensation. That checks another box. But I think to the extent that the legislator can help fuel the development office to help level some of the handicaps that the state might have as it relates to topography, roads, and infrastructure. And I'm aware that the state is facing a budget shortfall and dollars are tight. But I think if you look at any major business school and you look at their case studies, when sales are down is not the time to cut the marketing budget. It's the time to increase the marketing budget. And so on behalf of the development office and on behalf of people that do what I do for a living, I certainly would encourage you to give them the tools and the ammunition that they need to compete in a highly competitive environment. If there are any questions.
Could I ask that maybe we hold off on questions and let Tom give his presentation and then ask questions for either one? So, Jim, I'm going to take away the microphone. The other site selection consultant we have is unfortunately had an accident, I think day before yesterday, and tore one, maybe both rotator cuffs. So Tom Turner did not make the trip, but we've got him on the phone here. So Tom Turner is the managing director with international corporate real estate company Newmark, Knight, Grubb, and Frank. He specializes in assisting industrial companies making site selection decisions. In his 27 years of experience, he's handled over 1,000 transactions, and he's based in Charlotte. So with that, my fingers crossed on the technology, I'm going to turn this over to Tom.
I apologize for the misfortune I've had in the last couple of days, and would much rather be there in Charleston with your committee than sitting here with a sling on my right arm. But having said that, thank you for the introduction. I'm here in support of the West Virginia Development Office. Just a brief background. I, too, have been on the economic development side in my career, having served at the North Carolina Department of Commerce back in the mid to late 80s in Governor Martin's administration, and now on the site selection brokerage side for what was Hart Corporation, now Newmark, Grubb, Knight, Frank. We've certainly had a lot of activity over the years during my 27-year career in West Virginia, and most recently completed the sale of the Caterpillar facility in Beckley, West Virginia. I'll just comment on that briefly, in that my colleague and partner, who is the president of Hart Corporation and our practice group, Hart Industrial Group at NGKF, Bob Blackman, who sits in Philadelphia, came in to start the project up with me, canvassing, doing wage and labor interviews, so on and so forth, for about a week. And in the process, we opened up with a community luncheon, kickoff luncheon for that marketing effort. And his misperception of West Virginia and some of the things that have changed in your state were significant for a person that's been in the business for 35 years, principally doing industrial real estate in secondary and tertiary market America. And Todd Hooker, who was present for that community kickoff luncheon, set him on the right path in terms of what you've done on workers' compensation, what you've done in terms of right to work and tort reform, all to the benefit of your state in terms of its positioning, competing with other states. What we've had a difficult time with in many cases in recent site selection opportunities is finding product in the state of West Virginia. And one of the things that we discussed was in preparation for this presentation, if I looked at funding mechanisms for an economic development program at the lead agency of the state, of any state, it's typically how do you get your message out, which would be the lead economic development agency and its activities. How do you then create product for the outside world to take a look at? And then lastly, how do you win a project? So what I thought I would do, my territory, brokerage territory within Newmark, Grubb, Knight, Frank is West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. So I thought I would take a comparative look. Let's talk about, number one, the mechanism to get your voice out. And in North Carolina, which is part of the North Carolina Department of Commerce, has a public-private partnership and a 5-year contract with EDPNC, Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, of which they received about $19 million in funding annually. 89% of that comes from the state, 11% of that comes from private funds. In addition to that, they have allies to help them that they put together additional funding to help for marketing missions, working in front of site selection consultants into certain areas of the country to meet with them, going overseas and meeting with potential companies or working particular shows. And in that process, excuse me for a moment, in that process, they've been able in the past year to raise an additional $2.09 million in funds for those activities. In South Carolina, the South Carolina Department of Commerce receives $19.5 million in funds from the General Assembly, and they too have an allies program called Palmetto Partners. Does the same thing as the Friends of North Carolina, and they raised about $1.025 million in funding last year. Virginia operates a public-private partnership through the Virginia Department of Commerce, and it's called Virginia Economic Development Partnership. In 2016, they received $20.7 million in funding. In 17, that would be increased to $27.05 million in funding. And all of that, even though it's a public-private partnership, all of those funds come from the state. And there is no additional allied funding program. I'm going to skip down, if you'll look at the slide that's in front of you. All of these states have, from a product development standpoint, site certification programs. A lot of sites, counties will come in with sites that they deem appropriate for industrial development. And instead of a site selector coming in and taking a look at a site that's deemed appropriate for industrial development, they go through a number of steps. The state has set up criteria that a county must pass those steps in order to certify a site for industrial development. That includes everything from geological testing to environmental assessments to infrastructure assessments, so on and so forth, in order to make sure that that site's presented, and if a company is on a fast-track consideration, then they know they have a site that has proven capabilities, having gone through a number of criteria and certifying that site to be ready for industrial development. The third part of the process then becomes, the closing activities to win a project. When you're when you're a site location consultant / broker focused on the transaction side for a client that's out there with a multi-state, multi-site search, then ultimately that project comes down to 2 or 3 locations out of probably anywhere from 10 to 20 screened in a multi-state region. And always the drivers are, first and foremost, location, raw materials, and labor. But ultimately, when it comes down to the final site selection criteria, discretionary funds at the state level and the local level can mean the difference between whether a project gets a warm and fuzzy and says, this is where we really want to be, or those discretionary funds overcome some major hurdles in terms of price considerations that make it more worthwhile to go to one location over another. And in North Carolina, those discretionary funds, the governor's 1NC fund, which is tiered, going highest to lowest in terms of economic development vitality of counties, receives $8.5 million annually. There's a bit of a misprint. That should be JDIG, Job Development Investment Grant. And that's a self-funding program where companies pay in their personal income tax, and a percentage is granted back to them to offset the cost of locating or expanding a facility. Again, that's a tiered program, and it's capped at $25 million this past year. There's about $61 million in commitments out there on prior projects. In addition to that, North Carolina received tobacco settlement funds. Their program in North Carolina at the state level is the Golden Leaf Fund, and they've allocated $650 million for economic development, of which $10 million per year goes to project closing and development. They also have $45 million set-asides for mega site developments. There are 3 in the state of North Carolina. In South Carolina, the governor's discretionary fund is a set-aside fund. Is a closing fund, and that can go to land, can go to buildings, can go to infrastructure, can go to a number of things. That's at $10 million. They also have, the legislature has a set-aside fund up to $20 million last year for infrastructure and site prep, so on and so forth. All of that is handled through the South Carolina Coordinating Council, which is the chair or heads of 11 state agencies that essentially decides the merits of doling out those discretionary funds. Much like North Carolina, they also have a self-performing job development credit, be much like JDIG is in North Carolina, where you have a percentage refund on state employee withholding tax. They do not have a cap in South Carolina. And then there's also special source revenue credits, which is just another way to further reduce the fee in lieu of tax. And this is at the local discretion and in conjunction with the South Carolina Department of Revenue. That typically for a manufacturer can go as low as 6% of the assessed value of the property. Switch over to Virginia. The governor's discretionary fund there is known as the COF, or the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund. It's funded to the tune of $10 million per year. The Virginia Jobs Investment Program is a cashback grant for jobs created. And there's a little bit of an issue there in terms of how the state views that. It was originally set up for job training program, but it's a cash grant to the company, and they can use it for training employees, or they can use it at their discretion. I think there may be a movement toward putting the BJIT program where the cash actually goes to the community college system for that training. There's also their tobacco settlement funds, which was about $3 billion, $500 million they earmarked for economic development. There's 39 eligible counties that can receive those funds, and it's based on the county's either growth, processing, or manufacturing of tobacco products in its history. They've allocated $100 million for mega site development, of which there are 3. They have the $100 million, which they use for dark fiber to get broadband into rural areas. That Mid-Atlantic Broadband Communications, which is what MBC stands for, has been built out for about 1,800 miles, and you'll see that, why there are companies in locations like Ashburn, Virginia, that are doing co-locator and mega development data center sites. And they're actually leasing strands of fiber through that MBC development. And then there's a little bit of a misprint there too. They're legislative enterprise zones, not bonds. And I apologize for that. But in Virginia, you have in those enterprise zones, which receives about $1.8 million in funding. There's job creation grants. Those have wage thresholds associated with them. They're real property investment grants, and those have thresholds where you have to at least have $100,000 minimum in acquisition or expansion in order to qualify, or for new construction, $500,000. So there are a number of those programs that are available in the state of Virginia, and all of those are in addition to programs that are doled out where the community may have incentive programs to add to the pot. Lastly, in terms of mega projects in the state of North Carolina and South Carolina, but not so in the state of Virginia, their legislatures are willing to pass legislative bond issuance for mega projects. Most recently in South Carolina would have been the Volvo plant down in Berkeley County near Charleston, and I would venture to say that there's probably $100 to $125 million in bond issuances for that site, and the state has even come in where they had a rail line that was needed for the site itself, and they found out they couldn't build off of the Norfolk Southern rail line. Then the state-owned Palmetto Railway has come in, and they're building track over to serve that site off of a Norfolk Southern main line. In North Carolina, we had a similar situation that was a failure. A few years back, we sold the old Continental Tire site, in Charlotte, which is about 2 million square feet, and then Continental Tire had a plant site search, which ultimately came down to a site in Leland, North Carolina, near Wilmington, and then a site in Sumter, South Carolina. The South Carolina legislature passed a legislative bond issuance. North Carolina did not. South Carolina won the day, and that plant is now up and running in Sumter, South Carolina. That forced the state of North Carolina and the legislature to relook those opportunities, and today you would find them to put forth a legislative bond issuance for that type of a mega project. If you go to the last slide, and then I was asked, what does it look like in the state of West Virginia? The West Virginia Development Office, you've got $10.8 million in funding through 17, of which $2.5 million is set aside for business development and recruitment. There's no additional allied program in terms of site certification. There's not one. Where you have discretionary funds or grants, you've got set aside for up to $4 million, which is the Infrastructure Job and Development Council, as well as performance-based forgivable loans or term loans for site and infrastructure issues. And then bonds are the typical industrial development bonds through the West Virginia Development Authority. So from a standpoint of stacking up against those other states that I do business in, you can see that there's a lack of funding in those efforts in comparison to those three other states.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. I appreciate that. How about if we open this up now to questions for either Jim or Tom?
Questions of any of our presenters? Questions? Delegate Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions would be for the gentleman on the phone. Is he still available?
He is.
I'm interested in what's being done in other states, and I'm wondering if any of the other states combine their tourism development with their regular development office activities.
Tom, did you get that question? The question was if other states combine their economic development activities with their tourism activities.
Yes. In the case of EDPNC, you'll find tourism under EDPNC. What portion of the budget that is, I'd have to go back in and take a look at it. But it's a public record. You can actually pull it up since it's a public-private agency. South Carolina Department of Commerce tourism falls under that. It is a separate budget line item. You can also pull that up on a web search, which is what I did. And then each of these are references from initial web searches and then conversations with either board members for the EDP, board members for the South Carolina Coordinating Council, board members from EDPNC, or actual directors of those departments.
Thank you. Another question, may I? Another question, sir. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I'm interested also to know if in the other states, if local government, either county or cities, have development activities, or is it all state organized?
The question is, are these economic activities inducements local in addition to state, or are they typically led by the state?
No, most of when it gets to the higher profile projects, and I would typically term those as, a certain capital investment, maybe over $10, $15 million and up, maybe 200 jobs, and then wage performance criteria. Most of those are led by state economic development efforts in trying to close the deal. However, there are communities that are, some communities are certainly better off in terms of revenue to be able to compete for economic development projects than others. A perfect example, Martinsville, Virginia, which is on the state line. It would be in southwest Virginia, above probably 45, 50 miles north of Greensboro, North Carolina, 45 miles south of Roanoke, Virginia. They sold their hospital system for a very large amount of money. It's called the Heartland Fund, if I recall, and they utilize that for economic development. They actually have a 1,000-acre site known as Commonwealth Crossing at the state line, which is Highway 224 lane down to Greensboro and the connector of I-85 and 40, and north up to I-81 connector with Roanoke, Virginia. And in that particular case, they're utilizing those funds not to build speculative industrial shell buildings or anything of that nature, but they're actually pad grading, and when I say not pre-graded sites, but pad-ready construction sites of 500,000 square feet, 350,000 square feet, and 100,000 square feet. And there's a Norfolk Southern Railroad line adjacent to it. So they're actually paying for on the front end to get the spur going into the project, because oftentimes that's the greatest hindrance for a rail-served user, is that they've got to wait 18 months to build off of a Norfolk Southern or CSX line. So that's an impediment. When you can build, from scratch a project in probably 8 to 10 months, a large industrial facility, they've eliminated the permitting, a good portion of the permitting process. They've eliminated a good portion of the site development process, and now they're pad ready to go. And in Virginia, for example, at the local level, they have a fast track permitting process. In West Virginia, if I recall, when we were looking at a site for a project that ultimately located in Chester, Virginia with Niagara Bottling LLC, We were looking at a site in Berkeley County, West Virginia, and there was probably a 90-day process to get those that permitting done at the local level.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask one more
Yes,
question?
sir. This is going to be your last one.
This is, in looking at the budget for the development office, I see that $8.2 million out of a $10.8 budget goes for personnel expenses and unclassified and just general expenses, and very little goes to specific programs. And I'm wondering if that's the way it's structured in other development offices, say in North Carolina, South Carolina, or Virginia.
Well, thank you much for making that observation, because we are comparing apples to oranges if you don't make the point that you just made. Of that 10.8 million or whatever it is, the vast majority goes to maintain the staff and keep the organization running, leaving us with very little money to compare with these other states. So, Tommy, the question, I think Jim could probably, either one could answer it, but I will tell you we're brief on time here, is that essentially when you're comparing this 10.8 from West Virginia, that's what we use to fund all of the development offices, personnel and activities, leaving us something around $3 million or so to invest in projects. The question was, I want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. The numbers that you threw out are not for staff salaries, but therefore things that are going to induce development.
Well, and this is for North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Again, you can web search and you can pull those numbers up on a line-by-line item. I'm going to guess, just from looking at those line-by-line items, in comparison, probably 50 to 60% goes to recruiting activities, and then the remainder goes to maintaining staff, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Further question. Delegate Brewer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, I got in just a little bit late. I would like both of the gentlemen that I heard speak, could you give me some details on, you both mentioned how Right to Work has helped the state of West Virginia. I remember last year the former Commerce Secretary testifying in the Senate Finance, if I'm not mistaken, and I think his entire career has been in economic development, that he had never been asked, not one time, if West Virginia was a right to work state. And I'm just curious if you could give me some details on how that legislation has helped West Virginia. Either one.
From my perspective, if you look back at some of the charts and the data points that corporations consider when they're looking to do a new facility, right to work is generally one of the boxes that needs to be checked off. Virginia used to tout itself as being the northernmost right-to-work state, and they drove that philosophy consistently through all of their marketing. So it won't tilt the scales in favor of a particular state, but all things being equal, in most of the site searches that I've been involved in, a right-to-work state has been a primary concern.
Can you name any business that has not located here because we weren't right to work?
Well, I cannot, but when sometimes states or sometimes companies do their own evaluation before they involve a site selection consultant, and while I can't cite any examples, my guess is at some point in the past, a company wanted a right-to-work state, and if West Virginia wasn't one, it didn't make the short list of further consideration.
Your guess? Your guess?
My guess?
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Westfall.
Thank you. Thank you all coming today. It is refreshing to hear that some of the companies looking at, we do have a solid workers' comp program. We do have tort reform. We did legal legislation the last couple of years. And now right to work box, you can check it off. Good to hear that. My question is, we get about $2 million for things you want. If we give this SOS plan $25 million, $30 million. I don't think you're going to see $105 million. But if we give you part of this year, what can we, I mean, what do we expect? What can you really want to do?
I'm going to answer that one, and I appreciate the question. West Virginia is dead last. And the reason we're dead last is a variety of reasons, but relative to Department of Commerce, it's because we do not have the tools in our toolbox to attract business, specifically really good sites. I think we're doing a pretty good job on workforce training. I think we've got a great quality of life, but we are way behind everybody else when it comes to having sites ready. Now, that doesn't mean fully grading sites out, but it does mean having them prepared that this activity can take place fairly quickly. So I would suggest to you, if you want to do anything other than be 50th for the rest of our lives, that we had better jumpstart this economy. And I think giving us a $35 million minimum is critical to this development office being able to do the activities necessary to jumpstart this economy and take us somewhere from dead last. We are way behind. That's demonstrated in all kinds of criteria, and my suggestion is it's critically important that we do that, primarily to get site-ready locations.
Okay, on that, do you have any out there waiting possibly? I know
Absolutely.
I'm from Jackson County,
No, we've
but
got-
they sell the plant up there. That's a prime real estate. You got flatland, river, rail, interstate, and people looking to work. So, I mean, you have some in mind.
We do, and unfortunately, this is the kind of business I found out you really can't name names.
I understand that.
And it's critically important, but absolutely, and I keep saying this over and over again, we're not limited by the number of opportunities, as in businesses to attract to West Virginia, particularly those singles. You know, everybody wants the home runs. The singles, they're not so competed against, and I think there's a wealth of opportunity in terms of hitting these singles, which is, to me, the formula for success in West Virginia, and we see them all across the state, including Jackson County.
Last thing.
We're going to have to leave this presentation by Commerce Secretary Woody Thrasher to take a brief break, and then we'll be back here on the West Virginia Channel with the meeting of the Senate Select Committee on Tax Reform. Back in a moment. And welcome back to the West Virginia Channel, a service of West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Next, a recording of a meeting earlier this morning of the West Virginia Senate's Select Committee on Tax Reform. At issue here is Senate Bill 335, repealing the consumer sales and service tax, use tax, and personal income tax. The chair of this committee is Senator Carnes. Senator Blair is vice chair, and members of the committee are Senators Boso, Ferns, Gaunch, Jeffries, and Plymel. Here's this committee meeting from earlier this morning.
Okay, the meeting will come to order. I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Select Committee on Tax Reform meeting. The clerk will take a silent roll call to determine the presence of a quorum. And go to my vice chair for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the minutes from our March 11th meeting be approved.
Okay. Questions on approval of the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. And we will move on to our first order of business. We've taken some of what we learned in our last meeting and revised our committee substitute, which is now before the committee. It includes the amendment that was adopted by this committee related to military pay being exempted, as well as some other changes. And if council will explain what we're looking at now in lieu of having it read.
The clerk should have provided all of you on the chamber automated system, the updated committee substitute, along with the abstract and the list of changes from the original introduced version to the current version. What I'm going to do is provide a overall summary of the bill, of the current committee substitute that's in front of you currently, and then turn it over to Mr. Carl to answer some of the more technical and detailed questions that you may have. So the current version.
Senator from Wayne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donnie, if you could, let's go back to where we were at the last meeting and what changes you're proposing this time. Could we just get that in context first, please? You said there's changes, this is a moving target, and I would like to know from the last meeting what changes are being made in this new committee substitute.
Senator, I have you have the list of the ones, I think there are 35 or so that were changed from the introduced version.
I remember the introduced version. You only had one amendment that was offered at the last meeting. So what other changes are being made according to the new version of the bill?
I have the list, but I would think Mr. Carl would be in a better position to answer those questions because he understands the technical aspects of them.
I'd like to know before we get started so we at least know what's happened from the last one to this one.
Okay, I will give you generally the list of changes from the last version until this version. We included the military retirement pension that was voted on in the committee last time. The historic tax credit that would increase the historic tax credit from 10% to 25%. I think you and Senator Jeffries and some of the other senators on this committee introduced a bill to that effect. We used that language to include that into the bill. We have a vaping amendment, which is very technical, that we included in the bill. We have a
vaping amendment
on e-cigarettes and e-liquid. We included that in the bill. We have a trigger on the personal income tax with the fiscal note. As you recall, it was revenue positive for several years, and then the revenue declined. Instead of automatically stepping down the personal income tax, we included language that just, if certain triggers are met, that then it would go down. Otherwise, it would stay at a 2.5% level, because in the last version, so that's another change. It was at 2.65. We've changed that to 2.5%. We have a fixed income tax credit for seniors who are 65 and older. We included an earned income tax credit using TANF money. And then we have an additional amendment regarding any money in fiscal year 2018 over $150 million that comes in would go into the rainy day fund. And then for subsequent years, we have something that allows for additional money to be placed in the rainy day fund. So I think
So let me make sure on the 150 million, if there's savings or additional revenue of 150 million, that the additional money goes into rainy day fund, or what is the 150 million?
So as you saw, let's use the numbers that we saw last time for the fiscal note. There was 344 million that would projected to be come in over as surplus. So everything above the 150 million would, so approximately almost 200 million would have been placed in the rainy day. So everything over 150 million of that amount would go over into the rainy day fund.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think that really helps in
Sure,
getting things.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead and continue, Council.
Okay, just one more. Sorry, my computer's not pulling up the document. So generally, broadly, what the committee substitute for Senate Bill 335, the version currently in front of you does, is it takes the current consumer sales and service tax that is at 6%. It increases that rate to 8%, and but it broadens the base as well. Some of the current exemptions or the loopholes that are in the system have been closed.
Donnie, let me interrupt you for just 1 second, because I want to make sure, and if I'm not mistaken, I think I heard something that was maybe missed in the description of what got changed. We've also changed where we have the food tax being re-implemented. That doesn't happen until January 1. Am I right in thinking?
Yes, on the time frame. That's another change that was.
And we also pushed back the start. Or we'd previously pushed back the start to October 1 for, okay.
I thought we'd previously, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So one other change that just so the senator from Wayne has that, we didn't bring the food tax back until the 1st of January when the income tax changes are being made. Go ahead, Donnie. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
So as I mentioned, the base of this new revised sales, service, and use tax has been broadened, and it currently now includes food. There's a few of them. This isn't an exhaustive list, but food, delivered newspapers, utility services, some personal services, some professional services, construction services for direct use and manufacturing, mining, agriculture, communications, transportation, and transmission businesses, favoring hired labor over contract labor. Some of the exemptions from the revised sales tax that are currently in place are school and college tuition, sales of most professional services, advertising, data processing, employment services, retail sale of prescription medicines and medical devices, sales of goods for direct use in manufacturing, mining, agricultural production, transmission, communications, and transportation businesses, sales to government entities and most charities, isolated sales, sales for resale, sales of textbooks, licensed daycare services, financial services, and aircraft repair services. Currently, July 1st, If the voters approve a constitutional amendment that we will be introducing in the very near future, which will be called the Fair and Simple Tax Reform Amendment to the Constitution, if the balance of the rainy day fund meets a certain level, then 50% of any surplus for that fiscal year will be deposited into the rainy day. And then we also, for fiscal year 2018, all collections of the revised sales tax, as I mentioned a moment ago, in excess of $150 million will go into the rainy day fund, and then there'll also be triggers for that in future years to allows excess money to be deposited in the rainy day fund. Starting January 1st, 2018, the personal income tax will be reduced to 2.5%. In the previous version that we had in front of you, that was 2.65. We lowered that rate. So then once the personal income tax is repealed, if it is repealed with the step down and the triggers, at the end of each fiscal year, the year's balance in the rainy day fund exceeds 10%, the rate of the corporate net will begin to be reduced by 1% per year until that is also repealed. The severance tax, the current 5% severance tax on coal, for larger seams, it's 5%. There's also a 1% tax for thin seams and another 2% tax on thin seam. That has been unified into one uniform 2.5% severance tax for coal. And that will be stepped down over a period of 2 years to 2.5%. It'll go from 5 to 3.75, and then subsequently the following year it will go to 2.5. And then after the corporate net is stepped down, which were the triggers, then natural gas rates will also move from 5 to 4 to 3. Also, we have as I mentioned before, the earned income tax credits and the fixed income tax credit for low income workers and low income senior citizens. Some of the other changes that I outlined a moment ago include the elimination of the $20,000 a year limit on the retired military pay. Now that there's no cap on that for personal income tax, so those all that income is now exempted from the personal income tax. The historic building rehab tax credit, as I explained, is in there. The vaping amendment is in there. There's an imposition of a retail sales on certain products at 11%, and that's the overall big picture of what's in the bill. The current version, as you see, is approximately 80 pages, so there's quite a bit of information and detail in there. But as a broad summary, that's currently what you have in front of you.
Thank you, Donnie. Do we have any questions of council? Any discussion? I don't see any lights. Yeah, committee will stand at ease for a minute.
This is the Senate Select Committee on Tax Reform, hearing an explanation of the new Senate Bill 335, repealing consumer sales and service tax, use tax, and personal income tax. This was recorded earlier this morning. This committee is at ease at the moment. They've heard an explanation of the changes to the bill. There were no questions, so they're waiting for something to happen, and we'll wait here as well.
She's pregnant now.
Okay, we are back. Select Committee on Tax Reform, and I will go to the senator from Kanawha, senior senator from the 8th.
Offer amendments. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I effectively have 4 amendments, but I'd like to ask unanimous consent they be considered as one. Amendment number 1 deals with the soft drink tax, preserving the 1 cent that now goes to WU School of Medicine, but increasing that tax from 1 cent to 5 cents.
Okay.
And then number 2 deals with the sale of alcoholic beverages, which affects Chapter 60, Article 3A of the Code. Subsection B says that that the established tax will yield a net profit for the General Revenue Fund of not less than $6.5 million. This amendment would change that to $13 million. And it would, just 1 second, let me find my notes. It would change the, in subsection C, would add a provision that says, provided that on and after July 1, 2017, until adjusted by the legislature, the maximum wholesale markup percentage applied to the prices paid by the Commission for all liquor other than wine shall be 36%. I believe that percentage now is 28%. Thirdly, it would, and I believe written copies of this are on their way, but it would move, the third amendment would move to increase the beer barrel tax from $5.50 per barrel to $11 a barrel. And lastly, a pretty simple motion to exempt Social Security from the income tax in the state of West Virginia.
Is that the?
That's 4.
And
yes,
you'd like to have those considered as one?
Correct.
Without objection? Okay. Do we have any discussion on the amendments? The senator from Wayne.
Would the senior senator from the 8th yield? Yes. Explain to me the last amendment that you said of the 4 that are considered as one, but what was the last one?
The last one is to exempt Social Security income as taxable income under our income tax laws currently exist.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. So what is the fiscal impact of that?
Council, do you have those numbers? I'm told it's about $90 million, Senator. I mean, I don't have an exact number, but that's the number I base my amendment off of.
That's the number. I believe it is approximately 90 million, but let me confirm that. I think I can.
No, that's good enough. I'm fine.
And if you would, Council, if I may, Mr. Chairman, since we're discussing this and I'm answering questions, can you give us the fiscal impact of the other amendments?
Senator, I don't have that information currently. But
Mr. Chairman, do you have them? Okay.
So, these are things as part of the overall context of tax reform that we had considered. And because of the place the fiscal note came in, had not previously intended to include within the package necessarily. But what I can say is the soft drinks tax currently at 1 cent raises roughly $15 million. So adding 4 more cents to that would generate roughly $60 million. The alcohol taxes combined would add about $13 million in that price range. So the 2 or 3 amendments in terms of the revenue side of this are 73 million, perhaps, roughly in that neighborhood.
And then 90 million overall reduction for the Social Security exemption.
Right. And given the fiscal note and where we are, my own belief is that we're still inside of our because we were 140 million more revenue than what, again, I'd sort of remind that the charge of the committee here was to produce revenue neutral changes to the tax code. And so I think that this stays roughly within that guideline.
Said 15 million for both liquor and the
13 million, I think, is actually the number.
For both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator from Wayne.
Yeah, you mentioned there was there were 4 amendments in that. What was the 4th one?
Well, the first was soft drinks. Second was liquor. Third was beer. Fourth was Social Security.
Okay, and then the liquor does
from, just a second,
28, is that the 28 to 36?
From 28 to 36, 28 to 36, with net proceeds of at least 13 million annually to general revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions related to the amendments? Discussion? The Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of discussion. I want to commend my colleague from Kanawha County on this amendment. I know that this has been a topic that's been considered for a number of years. The senior citizens in our state, obviously being on a fixed income, I've heard it from a number of constituents within my community, my district, that said that this is a serious burden that we put on our seniors here in West Virginia that some other states do not. So I just want to commend the gentleman and the committee on this effort to give a little break and relief to our senior citizens.
Thank you, Senator. Council, again, we had a number of different moving piece options that we'd considered, and so the 3 revenue amendments here we already actually had in writing. This possibility related to Social Security was presented this morning, but we don't have that in a pre-prepared amendment of any type. Do you feel like you completely understand what would be necessary to exempt Social Security? You're clear on what the amendment is and how it would need to be incorporated?
Yes, sir. It's my understanding that the Social Security would come off immediately.
Yeah, sorry. If you could approach the microphone.
Yes, sir. It was my understanding, to be clear, that I think I do understand it. The concept is to remove the Social Security income tax immediately as these 3 amendments, the revenue amendments, go into place.
Okay. And
on the effective date of the bill.
And I believe that's July 1. Yes.
Well, Senator, the bill goes, since our last iteration, we discussed that the bill would go into effect, October 1st.
Right. Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is because since we had these amendments, sort of out there for consideration, at least to see what they looked like before, I believe the amendments all say July 1.
I can change those to reflect the effective date of the bill to December 1, if that's the will of the committee.
So, Senator from Kanawha, would that,
Hold on.
let's stand at ease for a moment. Okay, we're back.
Mr. Carl's informed me, and he's correct, the consumer sales tax part of this bill doesn't go into effect until October 1st to kind of accommodate the tax department changes that they need to make, but there are internal effective dates for some of the other aspects of the bill that are July 1st, so that wouldn't be an issue. We could make this effective, the amendments for the revenue pieces, July 1st, and then also the Social Security will come off at July 1st.
The issue that I see with that is that the tax year starts on January 1, and if we make this effective on July 1, then in effect we would be breaking the tax year in half for Social Security. Is that, if Mr. Carl would like to maybe come up and address that?
The amendment can make it can be effective on July the 1st, but the amendment makes it so that it goes into effect on.
Gotcha. So, if you could go ahead and, your staff on the one hand, but on the other hand, not everybody knows your name. If you could go ahead.
Mike Carl, special consultant to the committee. The way that it strikes me that you can proceed is that the whole bill is effective July 1. Then there are internal effective dates for different parts of it. There's all kinds of them in there. One of them is that the food tax only goes in on January 1/18, that the income tax, some of the income tax changes, or all the income tax changes would take effect July 1, or January 1/18, because that's, as Chairman points out, that's the way income tax works, calendar year. It'd be awkward to have a change in income tax law in the mid-year.
So the effective date could still be July 1, but we would
Of the whole bill.
We would want the change dates in terms of the taxes to all occur on January 1.
Yes, sir. There's all kinds of, like the adjustment in the coal rates, that's supposed to take place July 1. And that can be done because that's broken up. But there's all, the historic rehabilitation is for investments made after July 1 of 17, but so, and that can all be measured. In other words, that they do affect income tax, but that's you can deal with any of this stuff if
right. But for all the seniors that might have to worry about this, my assumption would be
I'd love to get a head start on that exemption myself.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Senator from the 8th.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That was really my intention. So whatever I need to do to clarify that with unanimous consent, I would like to make sure that we understand that the internal effective date for this Social Security tax is January 1, 2018.
Along with the increases in the rates of the
correct
other taxes. So, Council, you have that?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Senator. Do we have any other questions related to the amendments as offered? Any discussion or further amendments to the amendments? Seeing none. Then the question is on the amendments. All those in favor? A roll call's been requested. If the clerk would take a roll, all those in favor of the amendments will say yay, and all those opposed will say nay.
Senator Bosso. Yay. Senator Ferns.
Yay.
Senator Gauch.
Yay.
Senator Jeffries.
Yay.
Senator Plowman.
Yay.
Vice Chair Blair.
Yay.
Senator Chairman Park.
Yay. Okay, that looks like 7-0, and I declare the amendments adopted. Do we have any other discussion or amendments? I don't see any lights. Not seeing any lights, I will go to my vice chair for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to report the committee substitute to the full Senate with the recommendation that as amended.
We've got to agree to the language of the committee substitute as amended.
Say this again.
We have to agree to the language of the committee substitute as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we agree to the committee substitute language as amended.
Okay, the question is on agreeing to the committee substitute as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have agreed to the committee substitute as amended, and I go to the vice chair for another motion.
Now, Mr. Chairman, if I move the report the committee substitute for the full Senate with a recommendation that do pass, but under the original double committee reference, first being referred to the Committee on Finance.
Okay, the question is on reporting the Senate Bill 335 to the full Senate with a recommendation that it do pass as amended with the original double committee reference that it be first referred to the Committee on Finance. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion, or excuse me, the committee substitute for Senate Bill 335 as amended will be reported. Do we have any other business come before the committee? Seeing none, I will go to my vice chair for a motion.
I motion we adjourn.
The motion's on adjournment. All in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
And that was a meeting of the Senate Select Committee on Tax Reform from earlier this morning. A full report on this meeting tonight on the Legislature Today with Ashton Mara at 6:30 on West Virginia Public Broadcasting. We will be back at 11 o'clock with today's floor sessions from the House and Senate. Until then, I'm Beth Voorhees for the West Virginia Channel, a service of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.